Expend4bles, or Expendables 4, it hits the big screen after almost a decade since number 3. It brings together some of the biggest action stars, and a few that are less known for action, and then promises blood, guts, bullets, and explosions. Number 3 was pretty lackluster thanks to the PG-13 rating, but now that the fourth is back in solid R territory, does this pack the punch it needs to make it exciting and fun? Armed with every weapon they can get their hands on and the skills to use them, the Expendables are the world's last line of defense and the team that gets called when all other options are off the table. But new team members with new styles and tactics are going to give new blood a whole new meaning. So if you saw my reaction video from the theater parking lot right after getting out from watching this, you'll know that this fourth movie does step up the action, violence, and gore in huge ways, especially after the abysmal lack of all that in number 3. And that is probably the best thing about this film. I don't kid myself when I sit down to watch an Expendables film. I am looking for crazy stunts, brutal hand-to-hand combat, a ton of explosions and bullets, and then watching a bunch of older action heroes say cheesy lines as they off somebody. I'm not terribly concerned with a deep plot or feeble dialogue. I want to turn my brain off and have fun. I'm just looking for pure escapism. Now, thankfully, the fourth film gives a lot of that. We get a ton of cheesy and cringeworthy lines from just about everybody in the cast. And I rolled my eyes multiple times when characters would say something that was so unnatural or weird, but it was also what I wanted them to do. There are a lot of insane stunts too, some of which I've never seen performed before, so the ingenuity and freshness of those were engaging and fun. Now, for example, there's a motorcycle chase through an area that you wouldn't expect. And to make it even more flashy and exciting, the bikes have some fun capabilities that make them super special and unlike normal dirt bikes. A hand-to-hand combat, it's frenetic and savage, especially when Tony Jaa and Iko Uwais are involved. Now, I'll get to more of them in just a bit, but there are a lot of close quarters fights that showcase fierce body blows from punches and kicks, and then knives are typically involved, and the special effects CGI team, they had their work cut out for them with all of the blood splatter and the spray that they needed to create. Most of the time there are a bunch of quick cuts with the fight scenes, mainly to keep the urgency and energy rush of the sequence at a maximum. But there are a few key fights where we get to watch more of the action play out without changing camera angles. And when we get these, they're typically showcasing a unique skill or something truly awe-inspiring when it comes to speed and agility. Finally, to satisfy that other action itch, there's a huge amount of gunfire and explosions. Rockets are used, fuel tanks blow sky high, vehicles are even launched into air acrobatics with the maximum amount of carnage delivered. These are all great at creating and maintaining frenzied excitement. But unfortunately, there are several items that hinder the enjoyment of this a lot. Now first, let's just go with the CGI and the fake backgrounds. These are atrocious. Now, I took my youngest son with me to the screening, and he said he'd seen better effects in CGI on low-budget parody films. And I have to agree. There is a large action sequence towards the beginning of the movie, and the camera focuses on Jason Statham or even 50 Cent as they're manning guns on top of these decked-out sandrails. Now first, the camera's way too close to the actors, but then the lighting, background, and every visual during these moments, they're laughable. They are so noticeably fake that it feels like these were created last minute with a handy cam on a $10 budget. And there are a bunch of these that are interspersed within a large chase sequence. It's really a bummer because the chase is actually a bunch of fun. There's adrenaline and danger. I was totally into it until they showed the close-up atrocities. And then within this chase sequence, and even a bit before it begins, there is a segment that involves the Expendables' plane. And these graphics look like they came from a PlayStation 1 that didn't even have an upscaler. I mean, calling it animation actually would be an insult to animators and computers. I mean, terrible. That's really the best I can say about it. And there's a big segment that takes place on a ship. Actually, it's probably at least half of the film for that. And when the action is taking place inside or close to the deck, there's no issue. But anytime we get to see large exteriors of the boat or looking out over the ship's deck into the sky or the water, that is horrendously generated and it just loses all feel of realism. And I mentioned the blood spurts already, but hey, I mean, at least there is blood this time, so I'm not really complaining. I mean, I'll take the over-exaggerated sprays over the lack of blood any day. Just like in all the Expendable movies, we get new characters that are introduced. This one is no exception. I was really hoping for the return of Antonio Banderas because he absolutely stole every scene that he was in number 3. And he's not in this one, unfortunately. But we do get 50 Cent, Megan Fox, Levi Tran, Jacob Scipio, Andy Garcia, and then two massive standouts with Tony Jaa and Iko Uwais. Jason Statham, Sylvester Stallone, Dolph Lundgren, and Randy Couture, they reprise their roles from the previous films. Acting, it's hit and miss. Really, it's not that large of a deal. I mean, this may surprise you, but Megan Fox was fine in this. She plays a fierce and no-nonsense warrior, and even though she's hampered by the scripting, she holds her own within the cast. Now, Andy Garcia is probably the weakest addition here. He's laughably bad, and there's even one point towards the end of the movie that it looks like he forgot his lines. So he repeats the last thing he said a couple more times before finishing out the thought. I mean, it was cringy, but in a really bad way. I want to take a moment to talk about Tony Jaa and Iko Uwais. These are two martial arts phenoms, and their mastery of their skills is jaw-dropping. Uwais has a scene where he gets to deliver rapid-fire punches. I swear, it's almost as if his hands are just a blur as they hit their target with lightning speed. But he also gets to use some toys that are brutal and way too much fun to watch him use. He's got what looks like police nightsticks, but they have very sharp points on both ends. Now, I'm not going to say any more about those, but you could probably use your imagination on his creative uses. And then we got Tony Jaa. When he unleashes his fighting, he is a total blast to watch. It also helps with his makeup and his costume. It just completes the look that matches his actions. And there is an awesome barbarity to the punishment Jaa delivers. And just like Uwais, he's lightning quick. But something else with Jaa's character is that I actually cared about him. I mean, he doesn't get much development, but it is more than other characters. But then the story, it actually took a moment to humanize him and make him someone that I genuinely liked. And then they gave him a huge sharp knife, and I liked him even more. Now, most of the cast are complete strangers, so there's very little attachment to them. Even with the returning characters, I mean, there's not much to this to create a draw to them, other than the history and the nostalgia that we've had with them in previous Expendable films and then their own action legacies. Now, for the story, it's thin, and that's kind of fine, but there's also this supposed twist in it, and it's laughable about how obvious and telegraphed it is. Now, that's not really a total reason to dislike the story. I mean, yeah, the story is generic and even ill-defined. I mean, when we understand the villainous plans, the reaction, sort of, well, I mean, that'd be bad and all, but, you know. At no point was I invested in the storyline, or even cared about the ultimate outcome of the plot. Unfortunately, and maybe even unexpectedly, it made large portions of the movie boring. There are multiple scenes of useless exposition, choosing to highlight downtime in hopes of maybe a joke working, instead of just building out longer action sequences. Anytime there wasn't a battle going on, I checked out. That's pretty unfortunate considering that I already had pretty low expectations for what I hoped to get from the movie. So overall, Expendables 4 is a disappointingly lackluster entry into this action franchise. While this does step up the violence and blood from the previous film, it loses even more of its heart and soul of what made these fun escapism movies. The CGI and special effects are abhorrent, becoming distracting to the action rather than enhancing it. Tony Jaa and Iko Uwais are the standouts in this, but even they aren't enough to drag this out of the mire of mediocrity to make it memorable. For action schlock, this is fine, but it's not worth shelling out your hard-earned cash to see it on the huge screens. Wait until it hits VOD, where your investment is then going to match the movie's CGI budget. There's some sex, no nudity, a ton of profanity, and even more bloody and brutal violence. I give Expendables 4 2 out of 5 couches. What's one of your favorite crazy action movies? And it doesn't even have to be good, just something that you love to watch. Let me know about it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.